What's up, guys? Steve here, and tonight we're going to be talking about the film American Animals, directed by Bart Layton and starring Evan Peters, Barry Keoghan, Jared Abrahamson, and Blake Jenner. American Animals is the true story of a group of 4 young college-aged men in Kentucky who, in an attempt to do something big and meaningful in their lives, attempt to plan and pull off one of the most audacious art heists in U.S. history. And keep in mind, according to the marketing campaign for this movie, this is not based on a true story. This is a true story. It is admittedly an intriguing way to market a movie. And that was one of the things that I noticed when I first saw the trailer for this film. But even when I first saw the trailer for this film, it looked like it would be good, but it didn't give me any inklings that it would be great. It was actually something else that intrigued me about seeing the film. This past weekend, I went to see a movie called First Reformed at a theater in Lombard, and it was my first time being at this theater. And as with any other film, they showed previews of other films before First Reformed began. And one of the previews that they showed was the theatrical trailer for American Animals. And it was a good trailer, it was intriguing, but again, it didn't floor me. It didn't make me feel like I absolutely had to see this movie. Until I saw who directed it. Bart Layton. For those of you who don't know, Bart Layton directed the documentary The Imposter. And if you haven't seen The Imposter, I'm not going to tell you anything about it, but please check it out. I'm pretty sure it's on Netflix right now. From The Imposter, I got the impression that he was an extremely good director and is very capable of spinning a compelling yarn and filming things in ways that make you think, I have to keep watching this. And I was honestly intrigued as to how he would handle a story like this. The closest place that it was playing to where I live was this theater in Lombard, and I'm not exactly super close to Lombard, but I was so intrigued at this point that I decided, you know what, I'm gonna go to tomorrow's showing and I'm gonna see how good this movie is. I'm gonna give it a chance, and holy shit am I glad I gave this a chance. I am not going to lie, this is probably, it's not my favorite movie of the year, but it is one of my favorite movies of the year so far. American Animals is a superbly entertaining and very compelling story. There are many reasons for this, but one of the big reasons why is because the performances by the 4 young main actors are very good. All of the performances are excellent across the board. I especially have to give props to Evan Peters. He plays a character who at first comes off as very cocky, and he's one of those guys who has a sense of bravado and kind of has a sense that nothing can touch him. He's the one who thinks that everything's gonna be awesome and everything is gonna play out exactly as planned. He's not really as prepared for this as he thinks he is. And once he ends up realizing that, it makes for some very good acting on the part of Evan Peters. And I also have to give props to Barry Keoghan, who was also in a few other films last year, such as The Killing of the Sacred Deer, which was one of those films that I am still not sure whether I liked or not, because it's one of the strangest films I've ever gone to a theater to see. I've seen stranger movies, but it's probably the strangest movie I've ever actually gone to a theater and paid money to see. But even with that being said, his performance was very good, and he played a very troubled character, and he was superb in doing that. And there are some scenes in this film where he really shines. Bart Layton really wants you to get this in your head that this is a true story. So instead of just having these actors portraying these characters, he actually splices in interviews that he did with the guys who really planned this heist, with them telling us what happened and splicing it in with the actors portraying what happened. And when you actually see these real guys on camera, and when you see the actors portraying them later on, you really see how well the actors did at portraying themselves as these people. And these juxtapositions of these interviews with these guys and the actors who are portraying them as they plan this caper end up making for some really entertaining and sometimes very thought-provoking scenes. And it actually reminded me a lot of Bart Layton's work on The Imposter, because one of the things that he really plays around with this film is the idea that memory is often extremely unreliable. And we often forget that when we're telling people this is exactly how this happened, but somebody else who was at the exact same event might remember it a different way. For example, there's one really well done scene in which the guys being interviewed, the main two guys who started the idea of the heist, end up talking about, again in separate interviews, how they came up with the idea to do the heist. One of the guys being interviewed, the cocky guy who's played by Evan Peters in the film, talks about how his friend told him about the idea for the heist at a party, while the exact same guy he's talking about in a separate interview says that he was telling him this on a ride home in a car. The way Bart Layton plays this out in the film and the way he cuts these scenes together to make it all one cohesive whole, even though there are contradictory things going on, is not only entertaining and fun to watch, but really shows how unreliable people's memories can be of events. But another thing to take into account is that a lot of these things that are contradictory things are really trivial things. You never hear the guys talking about how none of them remember a really big thing happening, or they always agree that one really big thing happened. But it's always something really small and trivial that they have conflicting testimony about. There are never really big things that really matter. They're always those really small things. And it goes to show that every single one of these guys, even though they didn't really know what they were doing when it came to planning the heist, they all knew deep down that the heist was not really a good idea. Even though they thought that they would get a really big thrill out of it, and even though they thought this is going to be the big thing that marks the rest of my life, they all knew that there could be some really big consequences. But they all chose to avoid it. And even when it doesn't come to actually having the real guys on screen, it's really fun to watch how this all plays out. There are 4 young guys, some of them haven't really known each other very well throughout their lives, and they all come together and they decide to do this thing that they think is going to be this big thing. And you can tell that they're really amateurs. There are scenes when they're all watching a bunch of heist movies. There's actually a really particularly funny scene where they actually go through the naming convention given by the film Reservoir Dogs. There's a scene in which the really cocky guy played by Evan Peters has an imaginative sequence where he's imagining how the heist will go, in which everything's going so smoothly, really well choreographed, when you know in reality that's not how it's gonna go down. And in a way, because it's a bunch of guys just getting together to do this thing, even though it's a heist, and even though you know it's probably not going to end well, despite that, there's a real underdog sense to what these guys are doing. Even though you know what they're doing is wrong, and even though half the time you want to smack them upside the head because they're making huge mistakes, and you don't really want to see these guys get in trouble. And it's not because they're inherently likable guys, it's mostly because of this thing that they're trying to do. And watching them go through this to try and get this done is really fun. But at the same time, it conflicts with this idea that what they're doing is a totally horrible thing to do. Seriously guys, this is one of the biggest surprises I've had this year. This movie was way better than I thought it would be. It was superbly entertaining. I really want to go back and see it, especially if it ends up hitting more theaters. If it hits a theater near you, I strongly urge you to check it out. Alright guys, that's all for my thoughts on the film American Animals, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and have a good night.